Good day, sir. We are from Group 2. We will present the title of the assignment, that is Marx's Law of Motion of Capitalism and the Comparison between the Theory of Economic Development by Adam. Today, I will present the Marx theory of history, law of motion theory, and the labor theory of value. Marx theory of history. In the theory of history, Karl Marx has saw how the society evaluated from primitive communism to communism. The society evaluating have 6 stages, that is primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, capitalism, socialism, and communism. In every stage, there has the conflict occur between the oppressing class and oppressed class. Primitive communism was a concept that traditional hunters and gatherers were based on irrigation, social relation, and common ownership, and it do not have any class conflict. Next is slavery stage. Slavery stage means people had to hard work for somebody without being paid a proper wages and not being able to change job because employer will punish him. Class conflict occur between owner-slaver and slavery. Feudalism was the system in European medieval societies where a society hierarchy was established based on the local administrative control and the distribution of lands into units. Class conflict occur between the landowner and serf. Next, capitalism replaced feudalism. Capitalism is a mode of production based on private ownership of means of production. Bourgeoisie and proletariat involved in the conflict. Bourgeoisie refers to the capitalists who own the means of production and most of the wealth in the society, whereas proletariat refers to the wage earners and who do not own means of production and it must sell their labor to survive. Socialism is a populist economic and political system based on the public ownership of means of production. State managers will oppress their workers to produce more product in order to increase the profit. Last stage is communism that aims to replace private property and a profit-based economy with public ownership and communal control of at least the major means of the production and the natural resources of a society. The focus of the assignment is discuss the internal contradiction within capitalism that cause class conflict between bourgeoisie and proletariat that leads to its being overthrown and replaced by socialism. Next, I will talk about the law of motion theory. This is the diagram of the Marx law of motion of capitalism. There are 6 important interrelated concepts in it. There are labor theory of value, the theory of exploitation, capital accumulation, centralization of capital and concentration of wealth, reserve army of the unemployed and immunization of the proletariat, and last is class conflict. Now I will talk about a labor theory of value. First, Marx analyzes the commodities in capitalist society. Commodities include the use value and exchange value. Marx determined the values of commodity by using socially necessary labor time, SNLT. SNLT is average number of labor hours required to produce the product. SNLT includes the direct labor in producing the commodity, the labor employed in the machinery, raw materials that are used up during the process of production, and last is value transfer to the commodity during the process. For example, assumes that producing a piece of cloth, the average labor time content is 8 hours. When the labor is in normal attitude, the SNLT is 8 hours, so the value is 8 hours. If the worker is lazy, the SNLT use is 12 hours, but the value of the product still is 8 hours. Vice versa, if the hardworking workers use 4 hours to produce the clothes, the value of the product also will be 8 hours. That's all from me. I will pass it to my friend. Thank you.
I will present the part on the theory of exploitation. After the labor theory of value, the theory of exploitation is explain how the capitalists receive a profit, and the answer from Marx is by purchasing the labor power that can create the value that is on. Therefore, the labor power and labor time will be carefully differentiated in this part. The theory of exploitation includes labor power versus labor time, surplus value, the rate of surplus value, the rate of profit, and the transformation problem. The first is labor power versus labor time. Labor power can be defined as the ability of a person to work, and it is a commodity that is bought and sold in the market. In a capitalist society, the capitalist will need it to gain profit. For the labor time, it can be defined as the actual process and duration of work. Therefore, it will include direct labor that produce the commodity. Besides, labor time will consider the normal production condition and the average labor skill and intensity. However, what determines the value of labor power? The answer is using SNLT, which is socially necessary labor time. It is required to produce the cultural necessity of life consumed by the laborers. For example, when the necessities are produced in 4 hours, the value of labor power will equal to 4 hours of labor time. However, if the necessities are produced in 2 hours, the value of labor power will equal to 2 hours of labor time. This means that the value of labor power decreased by 50% as the productivity of labor increased. There are two important points that need to be emphasized here. First, the wage paid by the employer to the worker is equivalent to the labor power of workers, which also means that paying the current market rate. The second important point is the market wage will only sufficient to buy the cultural necessity for labor to survive and continue. From Marx's perspective, he stated that the reason for subsistence wage is not due to the excessive population growth, but due to the capitalism has produced a large reserve army of the unemployed, which means the labor surplus that caused the average wage to be close to the cultural level of subsistence over the long run. The next theory of exploitation is surplus value. The surplus value, which also means the exploitation of workers. In these two pictures, we can briefly see how the surplus value occurs and the comparison of separating the profit to the worker and employers. The extraction of surplus value by capitalists is unachievable when labor productivity is so low that employees must consume goods worth the same as their own produce to live. According to Marx, labor exploitation occurs only when employees are able to produce more in a day than they require to support themselves and their families. Employers pay workers the full market worth of their labor power, although daily salary only account for a portion of the value created by the laborers. Hence, capitalists can control the length of the working hour and in a sense to say, work the number of hours that we set or choose not to work for us at all. However, the amount of time people spend working during the day generates a greater sum of value than the value of their own labor power.
Hi, I'm Loy Ching, metric number 270432. Next, I will continue with the example. From this graph, it illustrates how surplus rate was extracted. So we assume that 6 hours of socially necessary labor time are reflected to typical workers and their family must consume each day. For the first 6 hours, we assume that each worker convert 10 pounds of cotton into 10 pounds of yarn. Cotton used up has a value of 20 hours of labor, plus the wear and tear of the spindle equals to 4 labor hours. So now we can calculate the total of the yarn producers. We added up the labor hours, which is 6 labor power, 20 for cotton and 4 for used up spindle value. So it equals to 30 labor hours. And the total production cost is added up with 3 labor power, 10 for cotton and 2 for used up spindle value. So the total production cost is 50 shillings. However, in the first 6 hours does not bring any surplus rate or gain to a capitalist. Therefore, the worker working hour are extended beyond 6, as we can see in the graph. Okay, in this case, we suppose that the workers are required to work 12 hours per day. So 10 more pounds of yarns will be produced, as we assume that every 6 hours can convert 10 cottons to 10 yarns. In this case, the production cost is worth 12 shillings, which is 0 labor, 10 for cotton and 2 for used up spindle value. So why do you have 0 labor power? It is because of the occurrence of the surplus value in the hours 7 to 12. So it indicates that the capitalist made 3 shillings of profit from the labor power. Now we'll look at another example, which suppose the worker are required to work 18 hours per day. In the hours 13 to 18, 10 more pounds of yarns will be produced, and the production cost is also 12 shillings. Hence, another 3 shillings of surplus value occurs. The capitalist will earn a total of 6 surplus value in one day if a worker works 18 hours per day. In this example, we can conclude that the longer the working hour, the more the surplus value. Okay, next will be the rate of surplus value, which is the rate of exploitation. There are two formulas, which are S prime equals to S over V times 100 and S prime equals to unpaid labor time over paid labor time times 100. From the first formula, V is the variable capital, the purchase of labor power, and S is the surplus value. S prime is the rate of surplus value or the rate of exploitations. For the second formula, it represents the rate of surplus value is the ratio of the surplus value to the variable capital, which also means the ratio to unpaid labor time to paid labor time. So there are some calculation example. Based on the previous example, hours 1 to 6 does not occur any surplus value. So we'll only calculate for both hours 7 to 12 and 13 to 18. In hours 7 to 12, we substitute the surplus value and the variable capital, which are 3 for both. So we get 100% of rate of surplus. And also the equation beside, the top 6 is unpaid labor time and the bottom 6 is for paid labor time. And so the exploitation rate will be 100% as well. In the hours 13 to 18, we have to add up the surplus value that occurs in hours 7 to 12. So we have a total of 6 surplus value and 3 variable capital. Hence, we'll get 200% of exploitation rate. So we can see that the rate of surplus value increases when the working hour increases as well. Okay, next, there are another 3 examples, but in this 3 examples, we'll use the second formula. For the first example, suppose the working hour extended to 15 hours, which is the unpaid labor time, can be calculated by deducting the total working hours and the paid labor time. So we have 15, the total working hours minus 6, the paid labor time over 6 times 100. Hence, the rate of surplus value is 150%. If the working hours have reduced to 9 hours, we'll take 9 minus 6 and divided by 6 paid labor time times 100. Therefore, we'll get 50% of exploitation rate. In the last example, we assume that the working hours reduced from 12 hours to 10. In this case, instead of being divided into 6 hours of paid labor and 6 for capitalists, it was divided into 4 for the workers and 6 hours for capitalists because the working hours is reduced to 10. So the capitalists will maintain their gain and reduce the paid labor. Therefore, the rate of exploitation will rise from 100% to 150%. Next will be the rate of profit. From the formula, P prime is the rate of profit, S is the surplus value, C is the constant capital, and V is the variable capital. So constant capital plus variable capital will be the total production cost. In the first 12 hours, the production cost is 27. In this case, we only have 3 surplus value because it only occurs in the hours 7 to 12. So it will be 3 divided by 27 times 100, and the rate of profit is 11.1%. In the other case, if the worker extended another 6 hours, which is hour 1 to 18, and then we have 6 surplus value in total, and the production cost is 39. So 6 divided by 39 times 100, and the rate of profit will be 15.4%. We can say that the longer the working hour, the higher the rate of the profit the capitalist will gain. And that's all for me. I'll pass it to the next presenter. Thank you.
So I will continue with my part to discuss about capital accumulation and the falling rates of profit by Marx's law of motion. So first of all, we would like to know what is capital accumulation. Capital accumulation's basic definition is referred as an increase in asset by investment or profit. But according to Karl Marx's economic theory, capital accumulation is the process of profit being reinvested in the economy, and it will increase the total quantity of capital. So to understand this idea, we can have a short glance to the flow chart below here. So first, when the quantity of capital increase, which means that amount of capital increase, the quality of capital will increase because of the technological improvement, and eventually the return to capital will increase. So these are the short idea about what is capital accumulation. Okay. Next, we will talk about falling rates of profit. So according to Karl Marx, profit rate will tend to fall over the long run because of two reasons. So there are two reasons drive to this situation happen. The first is mechanizations, and the second is labor saving invention. So mechanization is referred to we want to improve the efficiency by using the machine, while labor saving invention is we substitute the human power by machine. And then Karl Marx, he classified this situation as organic compositions of capital, which is known as Q. So he even computed out a formula which is Q equal to C over C plus V. So in this case, Q is equal to the organic composition of capital, while C is the constant capital, and C plus V is the total capital, and V is the variable capital. So to understand this formula, we use some calculation to understand it. So when we let C equal to 3, while V equal to 6, and then we get a Q equal to 0.33, and then we alter the situation by decreasing the labor to 3. We in this case decrease to 3 because human input is one of the variable capital, so V is equal to 3 in this case, and then we get a Q equal to 0.5. So based on the calculation above here, we can prove that when labor being replaced by the machines, so V eventually will decrease and then Q will increase in this case. So which means that organic composition of capital will increase. So next, we'll talk about the alternative profit rate. So we have another formula here, which is P prime equal to S prime times 1 minus Q. Karl Marx, he said that when the capitalists are encouraged or motivated to do capital accumulation, so in this case, the capital accumulation means that the more capital are used, but less labor are used. So when we choose to use more capital, but we have to use less labor because there are a trade-off relationship between the capital and labor. So in this case, we can conclude that when V decrease because labor we use less labor, so V decrease and then Q increase, and the P prime will decrease. P prime, which is the rate of profit. So the rate of profit decrease is because labor are the sources of all value, include the S prime, which is the surplus value. So when we use less labor, profit rate will fall. So below we have two columns that show the relationship of P prime, which is directly with the surplus value, while P prime is inversely with the Q, which is the organic composition of capital. Okay, now we'll discuss about two reasons why capitalists will still use more capital to substitute labor, even though they know that it will cause the profit rate to fall, like what we have discussed in the previous slide. So the first reason is because they want to promote the efficient productions to the use of more constant capital. So in this case, I will explain it as when they use more effectively in the constant capital, it will increase the profit for temporarily because of the reduce or the decrease in the production cost. So when the decrease in the production cost, it will help the the price that we charge for the products will decrease. So for the firm that couldn't stand with these machinizations or they couldn't fit it with this situation, they have to leave the market. So the second will be the greater the efficiency of production, which means that we use more capital, so the lower the value of labor power. So when we use more labor, which means that machinizations, okay, so the number of hours required to produce the substance will decrease. Eventually, the total amount of profit produced per working hour will increase. Okay, last we will discuss about the offsetting force to the falling rates of profits. So Karl Marx, he have suggest a few ways to offset the force. The first way, which is intensity of exploitation, will be increased if the labor are forced to work for a longer pace and more working days. So when they are forced to work, so they will have more profit. So eventually, it will offset the falling rates of profit. So the second will be the wages will be temporarily decreased below its market value, or it can be said that it decreased below its value. Okay, so the third will be constant capital may be cheaper as machinery and raw material become cheaper. The increase in the organic composition of capital, which is Qs, and the decrease in the profit rates will become slower. So the fourth view is when the population increase and the technological unemployment increase, this situation are conducive for them to setting up a new industry that use more labor than capital. So in this case, we can say that now our industry are labor intensive. So when we use more labor, the S prime, which is the surplus value, it will increase. So eventually the rate of profit, which is the P prime, will increase. So when the P prime increase, eventually it will offset the force of falling rates of profit. Okay, and the last way is foreign trade rises the rate of profit by cheapening the elements of constant capital and the necessity of life. So capital invested in colonial, they will have a higher rate of profit because of two reasons. The first is the ratio of constant to capital variable are lower, and the second is exploitation of colonial workers are more intense. So when they have higher rate of profit, eventually they will offset the force on to their falling rates of profit. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Next, I will continue the part on capital accumulation and business crisis. Other than the falling rate of profit, the growing of business crisis also the main problem for capitalism. Marx says that sales law is only best when it applies to simple commodity production. This statement can be represented by the exchange process in small-scale production model, which is C to M to C. For example, C represents the commodity linen and food, while the M represents the money, which is the medium of exchange. This means that if the commodity linen is sold for money, the money will be used back to buy the food. In contrast, the exchange process will become M to C to M under the large-scale production capitalist model. This is because it involves people to buy to sell and not sell to buy. In this context, money will be changed to commodities such as labor power, raw material, and machinery, which will be sold for money. However, this process will not be effective if two M's are equal. Therefore, the correct representative of the exchange process are M to C to M0. The M0 is larger than M due to the exploitation of labor power. This is the expanding investment process. Rapid capital and labor investment will temporarily increase the labor demand and the wage that capitalists must pay. However, this higher wage rates will cause the rate of surplus value and profit to decrease, and eventually ending the expansion and the economy will fall. In short, when capital accumulation increases, the investment and labor demand will increase. However, if the labor demand is greater than the labor supply, the wage will increase and cause the rate of surplus value and rate of profit to decrease, and eventually economy falls. Therefore, the larger capitalists will buy smaller ones at bargain price. Labor demand and wage will decrease, and this will cause the rate of surplus value and profit to restore and increase, and eventually increase the capital accumulation. According to Marx, The current stagnation of production will prepare for the future expansion of production within the limit of capitalism. And he also stated that every such business cycle is more important than the previous one, increasing the condition for class struggle and social revolution.
Now, I'm going to present the capital accumulations and technological unemployments. Capital accumulations and technological unemployment is the stage which comes after the theory of exploitations. So, what is technological unemployment? According to Karl Marx, he divided the technological unemployment is a type of unemployment that happens due to the substitutions of labor with capital. Machinery, robots, and technology are the example of capital which stated by Karl Marx, which will replace the laborers in the production line. The hypers of substitutions of capital for laborers will cause an increase of unemployed industrial reserve army and the further immiseration of the proletariat. This is because the substitutions of capital for labor will cause those workers thrown out from their works. Now I'm going to continue my presentations with the centralization of capital and colonization of wealth. The dynamic of capital accumulations and the tendency for recurring business crises centralize the ownership of capital and concentrate wealth in fewer hands. In the state of centralization of capital and concentration of wealth, the growth size of firms weakening the competitions into fewer hands, which cause the emerging of monopoly powers occurs due to the increase of capital centralization and concentration of wealth in fewer hands. The larger firm able to obtain economy of scale and producing at lower average costs as compared to the smaller firm. This shows a situation where the larger capital firms beat the smaller capital firms with their large capital background. This competition rates in direct proportion to the number and in inverse proportion to the magnitude of the antagonistic capitals, which cause the elimination of small firms, as many small firms will quit from market due to the competition. This leads the growth of monopoly power as competition between the larger firms with lower cost production and the smaller firms. It always ends in the run of many small firms. It can be concluded as capital accumulations, economy of scale, and the dominance of the cooperation in business organization would bring to the concentration and centralization of capital into fewer hands. The following slide is reserve army of the unemployed and immiseration of the proletariat. The substitution of labor with capitals lead to an increase of reserve army of the unemployed and further immiseration of the proletariat. This situation happens is due to many of workers was thrown out from work, caused the situation of surplus in the labor market. Unemployed labor become jobless and poor, while employed labor was forced to work in a long hour to create a surplus value for capitalists, and the wage that they received was only enough for them to survive and continue their life. And out, the larger capitalists get to earn the surplus value and profit through immiseration and the lead to the growth of capital concentration. My following slide is class conflicts. The concentration of wealth in the hand of a few capitalists with the workers' poverty set the stage of class conflicts. The workers, raising their sense of solidarity and willingness to revolt, is fueled by their misery, operations, slavery, degradation, and exploitations. These divisions lead to the relation of productions under capitalism come in conflict with the force of productions, and former are rapidly transformed. The worker overthrows the capitalism and establishes a dictatorship of the proletariat. Finally, the capitalism is being replaced by socialism. That's for me. Now I will hand these presentations to my roommates.
Now I will continue with the comparison between Marx's law of motion theory and the theory of economic development by Adam Smith. These are the diagram of the law of motion and the theory of economic development. The comparison between the theory of economic development by Adam and law of motion by Marx were the Adam Smith believed that the capital accumulation bring positive effects for the economy. According to Adam, he said that division of labor helped to stimulate the capital accumulation. These two factors will increase the productivity because it helped to save time, improve labor skill, and encourage in creating new machines. As a result of capital accumulation, wages found increase and wages rise, and it will motivate further productivity growth. The rise in national output increased the goods available for consumption, thus constitutes the wealth of nation. But the Karl Marx believed that capital accumulation will bring negative effects. According to Karl Marx's law of motion theory, capital accumulation will cause falling rate of profit. Business crisis and technological unemployment. These outcomes lead to the concentration of capital and concentration of wealth. Besides that, the unemployment rate increase and lead to many workers become poverty. Polarization of capitalists occur and the worker involved into the conflict. As a result, capitalism collapsed and replaced by socialism. That's all for our group. Thank you.